For the Labour Party, Thursday was a landmark night in London. They won control of 3 councils from the Conservatives, notably Westminster and Wandsworth. In the rest of England, though, it was a different story. Once again, Labour struggled in the red wall, which was breached so spectacularly by the Tories in the 2019 general election. Despite the cost of living crisis, Partygate and the numerous other scandals that have hit the government in recent months, Labour still seem unable to convince enough voters to put their trust in them. Tom Slater is the editor of Spiked. On Friday, he wrote about the problems facing Labour, and he joins me now. Tom Slater, everyone. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, mixed results for Labour, in a sense. I mean, they were sort of cheering up these gains that they made. But as you pointed out in your article, they're all in London. I mean, that's not exactly where they need to be making these gains, is it?
Exactly. I mean, Labour really struggled basically in non-London England.
Yes.
And I think, if anything, the focus on the fact that they won in Wandsworth and Westminster and Barnet rather speaks to their problem, really.
Yes.
It's the fact that they're still struggling or actually going backwards in those Midlands and Northern seats that they so catastrophically lost at the last election. And they're just showing no signs of really being able to make up that difference. They're not completely in the doldrums. This government has given them a lot of open goals, essentially. But even with that, they're still on track, it looks like, at this point, not to be the largest party, nowhere near a majority at this point. And they're just still, I think, even given the circumstances that have been handed to them, they're struggling to make up that difference.
So how can that be? Because, you know, Partygate, it's been relentless. It went on for ages because there was one revelation after another. And just when you thought people got bored of it, something else turned up, you know. So there's just so much there.
It was the gift that kept on giving and giving and giving and giving, and yet I think it's shown the limits of what Starmer's tried to do, which is almost like politics of like lockdown respectability.
Yes.
I'm a straight edge. I follow all the rules. Lisa Nandy this morning called him Mr. Rules whilst trying to
what a terrible nickname.
No one's enticed by Mr. Rules, as far as I can tell. And of course it's come back to bite him because he's invested so much in this, and now we've got Cormer and Beergate, or whatever it's been called at the moment, where he himself is being investigated under all of this. So I think just this kind of abstract sense that he wanted to project of I'm respectable, I am electable. If you haven't got anything to back that up, voters aren't going to turn out for you. And I think that's something that we're seeing now.
Is he electable? I mean, isn't the initial selection of Starmer the problem? Wasn't Starmer the chief architect of Labour's disastrous second referendum policy in the first place?
Well, this is exactly it. I mean, he's kind of tried to pretend and tried to distance himself from that now, saying that he accepts Brexit as a fact. But as we all know, the thing that really pried those working-class voters away from Labour or out of not voting to vote for the Tory party last time around was that issue of Brexit. He is the architect of the second referendum policy. I think also on a lot of these kind of cultural issues that you've been talking a lot about on your show, Starmer, he's not a kind of paid-up member of the woke establishment, if you see what I mean. He seems probably as uncomfortable with these issues as anyone else. But he does feel the need to genuflect to it, to kind of give in to it.
Well, literally, actually, he took the knee during the Black Lives Matter.
Literally, as you say. And, you know, he can't... what I find fascinating about him is that there's, on so many issues that he's really gone to war with the left of the Labour Party. You know, he even expelled Jeremy Corbyn. He's even been leaning right on issues of crime and drugs recently, things that really infuriate the left of the party. But on a lot of these woke left issues, he's willing to kind of go along with it. He can't answer a straight question like, do only men have penises? And I think that fact, I think, is at least part of the picture of why people are still that little bit repelled from the Labour Party.
But is there anyone in the Labour Party that ever would do anything but capitulate to those issues? I mean, even Jeremy Corbyn was announcing his pronouns, buying into all of that kind of stuff.
I know the idea that anyone was ever in the dark as to whether Jeremy Corbyn was a man or a woman until he did that. It's very strange. But no, you're right. I mean, I think the problem is that even though a lot of the people, particularly those running the Labour Party now, broadly speaking from the kind of centre-right or the sort of soft left of the party, they don't really believe in a lot of this stuff. Some of them will, of course, but nevertheless they feel the sense, and the rightful sense in a way, that their base, the dynamism, a large proportion of the membership and all the rest of it, really care about this stuff. The problem is that the rest of the country are, to the extent that they know about it, they don't like it. I mean, there was a poll last year about just kind of woke politics in general. Something like 12% of people call themselves woke, 23% will say they're not, and 59% have no idea what it means.
Right.
Which I think tells you something about how distant on these issues the Labour Party is from a lot of the people that they really need to win over if they're going to be even within striking distance, minority government territory of being in number 10 Downing Street.
So there's two issues there, really, isn't there? So first there's Brexit. You know, with 70% of Labour constituents voting leave, it probably wasn't a great idea to go back to the electorate and say, you got it wrong, do it again. Because that's fairly insulting to their core base. But then on the second hand, you've got the kind of culture war stuff, which, as you point out there, is being waged by a very small minority of activists. Most people don't know about this stuff or even care about this stuff. They care about money and whether they can feed their kids and that kind of stuff. So why it seems very obvious to me that if Labour want a shot at this, they have to reconnect with those issues. Why can't they see it?
I think because they are in hock in terms of who runs the Labour Party, who campaigns for the Labour Party, the people who are the most passionate members. It's basically split. There used to be this old cliché that Labour is a coalition of Hampstead and Hartlepool, the traditional working class and the kind of liberal left intelligentsia. In terms of the people the most involved in the Labour Party now, it's a battle between Hampstead and Hackney, and I mean the gentrified bits of Hackney. That's really what we're talking about here. It's the Starmerites and the Corbynistas. It's two kind of bourgeois factions fighting over a comb, effectively. And this is the problem that they find themselves in. So they expend so much time, so much energy on these issues and these bizarre, strange, identitarian talking points that we find ourselves having to combat at the expense of actually trying to make something resembling a credible case.
But it's really important for everyone, whether you support Tories or support Labour, it's really important to have a credible opposition, isn't it? To have someone there. So what do you think would be the best approach for Labour now? Is it to embrace more traditionally left-wing ideas? Is it to focus more on economic inequality? Is it to rejuvenate the relationship with the trade unions? What is it?
It's so difficult because the world has fundamentally changed. I think that's one of the things that we have to reckon with. The trade union movement is a shadow of what it once was.
Yeah.
To a large extent, what we've been living through is the fact that we have had this kind of class realignment of politics because of the fact that old left-right split wasn't really working anymore. The last election, the Tories had this huge lead amongst working-class voters.
Yeah.
This is historically unprecedented. It's not just because the messaging of the Labour Party was wrong. It's not even just entirely the fact that Jeremy Corbyn took the Labour Party down a particular kind of rabbit hole that voters didn't want to follow them down. It was also the fact that just underneath the surface, politics has changed fundamentally. And I don't know what Labour's route back is. I mean, people talk about them losing the red wall. They also lost another red wall before that, which was Scotland. If we're even talking about Labour maybe getting into government, we're not talking about a majority here. No one's really believing that's going to happen. Exactly, or some sort of minority government propped up vote by the other party. So it's just struggling to fundamentally reckon with that issue. But is there a road back at this point? I'm not sure.
Well, could it potentially be a new leader in some way? I mean, is Starmer, do you think, the right person to carry them forward?
Well, it's difficult because he is so incredibly and sort of uniquely uncharismatic. I mean, the man's got negative charisma, and you combine that with not a lot of politics to speak of. You combine that with the fact he was the architect of the second referendum policy, as you've mentioned. It seems like an absolutely dreadful mix. But the reason that he won points to the problem with the Labour Party is who else? Who else is there? Who else has that kind of stature, that even just a sense of common touch? I mean, really, it's not all just about branding and all the rest of it. But they don't even have anyone who could do that effectively at this point, it feels like. So I should say, I don't think it's completely out of the question that he could be our next Prime Minister. But to the extent in which, will that be a kind of sustainable majority? Almost certainly not. And second of all, what's the Labour Party for? It exists to represent the interests of the working class. And there's no sense in which, even if it does get into power, that's what, as a political movement, it will be doing in power, if you see what I mean.
Well, it sounds very dismal for the Labour Party from your account. But, we shall see what happens. Thank you, Tom Slater, ever so much for joining me.
Thank you.